You spend your whole life building things. A name, a career, a fortress of success to keep you safe. Then one day, you look around from the top and realize the walls weren't built to keep the world out. They were built to keep you in. My name became a key that could open any door, but it couldn't start a single, genuine conversation. I had built an empire that spanned the globe, yet I felt like a stranger inside my own life. And I was tired. So tired of the performance, of the transactions that passed for relationships, and of the profound loneliness that filled the silence my achievements had brought. So I agreed to one last time. One final blind date. I didn't do it out of hope. I did it out of resignation. This is the story of that night. The night I was certain was just another predictable ending, but it turned out to be the most unexpected beginning of my life. That IT wasn't bitterness anymore, just a quiet erosion of hope. From my penthouse, the city below looked like a circuit board, a complex network of lights and connections that I was completely detached from. I ran a company with interests on 5 continents, a global brand built on the idea of perfect hospitality, yet my own life felt profoundly inhospitable. The silence in these rooms was an expensive commodity, one I had paid for with my own peace. My phone buzzed on the marble countertop, and I knew who it was without looking. Owen, my best friend, and my self-appointed, utterly failing matchmaker. I let it ring, watching the name flash, a small beacon of a world I felt increasingly alienated from. He called again. I finally answered, not saying a word. "Don't hang up, Gray. Just hear me out." Owen's voice was too cheerful, a grating sound against the quiet hum of the apartment's air filtration system. "There's nothing to hear. I have a good feeling about this one. She's different." I gave a short, humorless laugh. "Your good feeling last time tried to pitch me her line of ethically sourced candles over the main course. The time before that, she asked which of my properties had the best helipad for weekend getaways. Each date had been a performance. I was the audience, and the prize? They didn't see a person. They saw a solution, a walking investment fund, an answer to a life they wanted to build for themselves. The name Grayson Wild walked into the room long before I did, and it sat between us at the table, a third guest that ordered everything on the menu. Every smile felt calculated, every question a subtle probe for weakness, opportunity. "This isn't like that," Owen insisted, his optimism relentless. "Her name is Malene. She's normal." Normal. The word sounded foreign, like a place I used to know but could no longer find on a map. I remembered my last relationship, before the headlines and the public betrayal. It had felt normal, until I learned that the trust I built my life on was just another asset being leveraged. After that, something inside me shut down. Romance became a risk assessment. My heart became a closely guarded portfolio. "Owen, I'm done." The words were flat. "Final. One more. That's all I'm asking. For me. If it's a disaster, I will never mention the word date to you again. I swear on my terrible golf handicap." A long silence stretched between us. I looked out the window again, at the millions of lives burning brightly below, each of them a mystery. How many of them were lonely? How many of them knew what it was like to be surrounded by people but feel utterly, completely alone? The exhaustion was a physical weight on my shoulders. Arguing took energy I didn't have. Agreeing was just easier. It was a path of least resistance, a simple transaction to buy myself some peace from Owen's persistence. It was, in its own way, just another business decision. "Fine," I said, the word tasting like defeat. "One last time. But if she mentions a business plan or a personal brand, I'm walking out before the appetizers arrive." "She won't. I promise." He sounded relieved, victorious even. But I felt nothing. No anticipation, no curiosity, just a dull thud of obligation. An hour later, I stood in front of my closet. The rows of tailored suits looked like a uniform, a costume for the man everyone expected me to be. I chose a simple navy suit, the fabric impeccable, the cut precise. It wasn't about looking good. It was about creating a barrier. The watch on my wrist was heavy, a constant reminder of the time I was wasting. Each element was a piece of armor, carefully selected to deflect, to protect, to keep the world at a comfortable, sterile distance. As I walked out, the heavy click of the door closing behind me was the only sound. I wasn't going to a date. I was heading to another meeting, another negotiation. I just didn't know the terms yet. I arrived 10 minutes early. It was a habit from the boardroom, a quiet assertion of control. The restaurant was one of mine, technically, though I rarely visited. It was all low lighting and hushed tones, a carefully constructed stage for intimacy. I chose a table in the corner, a vantage point from which I could see the door. I had already written the script for the evening in my head. There would be the initial, wide-eyed recognition. Then, the carefully casual questions about my work, my travel, my life, a thinly veiled audit of my net worth. I would be polite, detached, and by the end of the night, I would feel even emptier than when I arrived. I signaled for water and settled in to wait for the performance to begin. She didn't make an entrance. There was no pause at the door, no searching scan of the room. I was looking down at my watch when I felt a presence, and when I looked up, she was simply there, standing by the table. She wore a simple gray coat, and her hair was pulled back in a way that was practical, not styled. There was a look on her face, not of awe or ambition, but of slight, genuine anxiety, the kind a normal person feels before meeting a stranger. "Grayson? Hi, I'm Marlene." Her voice was quiet, without the practiced cadence I was so used to hearing. "I'm sorry if I kept you waiting." "You're on time," I said, my tone more formal than I intended. "Please." I gestured to the chair opposite me. She slipped out of her coat and sat, offering a small, nervous smile. And then there was stillness. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a calm that seemed to emanate from her, a pocket of quiet in the murmuring restaurant. She didn't check her phone. She didn't launch into a pre-rehearsed anecdote. She just met my gaze, her own eyes clear and direct. For a full minute, I felt completely disarmed. I had no script for this. "Owen told me you're a very busy person," she began, her hands folded on the table. "I hope this isn't an inconvenience." "Owen exaggerates," I said, a reflexive deflection. "Does he?" She smiled again, and this time it was less nervous, more knowing. "He also told me you had a deep appreciation for old libraries. He said you believed they were the last quiet places in the world." The statement caught me off guard. It was true. I'd told Owen that years ago, after a particularly brutal week of negotiations, a moment of unvarnished honesty he had apparently filed away. No one ever brought up the things I'd said in passing, the small, human details. They only ever quoted my interviews from business journals. I suppose I did say something like that. I admitted. From there, the conversation drifted. She told me about her job at a local library, about the strange and wonderful things people use as bookmarks, a press flower, a train ticket from a decade ago, a photograph of a stranger. She spoke of the quiet dignity of books, how they waited patiently to share their worlds. She didn't ask me what I did. Not once. The most pressing question she asked all evening was, "So, have you read anything good lately?" The armor I'd worn into the restaurant began to feel heavy, unnecessary. The tension in my shoulders, a knot I carried with me from meeting to meeting, started to dissolve. I wasn't performing. I wasn't assessing. I was just listening. I was a man at a table, talking to a woman about books. The name, the company, the entire suffocating weight of my public life had vanished. I felt invisible, and it was the most profound relief. When the check came, I placed my card down without thinking. She immediately reached for her purse. "Oh, no, please. Let me get my half." "I invited you," I said, though it was Owen who had done the inviting. "Still, I'd prefer to," she insisted gently. There was no artifice in it, just a simple statement of principle. It was the smallest thing, but it felt significant. A transaction that wasn't a transaction at all. We walked out into the cool night air, the silence between us now comfortable, familiar. "Thank you for dinner, Grayson," she said, pulling her coat a little tighter. "Thank you," I replied, the words feeling inadequate. I wanted to ask when I would see her again, but the question felt too forward, a move from a playbook I no longer wanted to use. I didn't know the rules for this, so I just nodded. I watched her walk away down the street, her silhouette disappearing into the darkness. I stood there for a long time, the warmth of the restaurant fading behind me. The usual silence I returned to each night had always felt like peace. But tonight, for the first time in a very long time, it felt like loneliness. The following days were dissonant. I sat in meetings where billions of dollars were discussed with the emotional weight of ordering groceries, my mind replaying a conversation about abandoned bookmarks. I reviewed architectural plans for a new hotel in Dubai, but all I could picture was the worn spine of a book she'd recommended. The stillness she had introduced into my life had created a jarring contrast with the relentless noise of my reality. The silence of my penthouse no longer felt peaceful. It felt empty, a void where a quiet conversation should have been. I tried to dismiss it as a novelty, a brief departure from the norm. But the feeling lingered, a persistent low hum beneath the surface of my structured life. It was a feeling I hadn't realized I was missing, curiosity. After 3 days of this, I gave in. The excuse I gave myself was that I was near her library for a meeting, but it was a lie I told only to myself. I swapped my suit for a simple sweater and jeans, feeling like an imposter in my own skin. Walking into the public library was like entering another country. The air smelled of old paper and dust. The only sounds were the soft rustle of turning pages and the quiet thud of a librarian's stamp. It was a world away from the sterile glass and steel I inhabited. I felt clumsy, oversized, a trespasser in this sanctuary of quiet. I found her in an aisle, carefully placing children's books back onto a low shelf. She was so focused, so present in the simple task. She didn't notice me until I was standing just a few feet away. "Grayson," she said, her eyes widening in genuine surprise. A slow smile spread across her face. "What are you doing here?" "You said this was one of the last quiet places in the world," I replied, the words feeling truer than any I'd spoken all week. "I needed some quiet." "Well," she said, gesturing to the rows of books around us, "you came to the right place. Can I help you find anything?" We walked through the aisles, the towering shelves creating a world of their own. She talked about books with a passion that was both gentle and fierce. I found myself asking questions, not as a tactic, but because I truly wanted to know the answers. The ease between us returned instantly, as if no time had passed. "You know," she said, pausing to run her fingers over a worn hardcover, "I realized after our dinner that I never actually asked what it is you do. You're so good at listening, you never really talk about yourself." And there it was. The question. I could see the moment bifurcate. 2 paths laid out before me. The first was the truth, a single sentence that would erect the glass wall of my name and my fortune between us forever. I would become a headline again, an idea, a number. The second path was something else, a chance to continue being just Grayson, the man who liked old libraries. In that split second, a lie felt more honest to the moment than the truth. It was an act of pure, desperate self-preservation. I heard myself say. The words came out before I had fully formed them. Mostly freelance, travel pieces, things like that. It was a plausible lie, born from our conversation about books and worlds. And she believed it. Her expression softened with a look of what I can only describe as respect. "A writer. That makes sense," she said. "You have a way of seeing the details." That lie, small and impulsive, became the foundation of a borrowed life. Our meetings at the library turned into walks by the lake, the gray water reflecting the overcast sky. We'd get coffee from a small shop where no one knew my name, and we'd talk for hours. I learned about her daughter, Zoe, about her dream to one day open a small children's bookstore. She learned about my supposed travels, the parts of my real life I could repurpose into fiction without revealing the scale of it all. For the first time, I was building a connection that had nothing to do with my name, my company, or my money. It was exhilarating, and it was terrifying. With every shared smile, with every moment of genuine laughter, the weight of the lie grew heavier. This fragile, beautiful thing we were building was taking root in poisoned soil. It was a quiet, looming debt I was accruing, and I had no idea how I would ever pay it back. One evening, as we sat on a bench watching the sunset paint the sky, she turned to me. "It's nice, isn't it?" she said softly. "Just being honest with someone, not having to pretend." I looked at her, at the trust in her eyes, and I felt a cold dread wash over me. "Yeah," I whispered, the word feeling like a betrayal in my own mouth. It's the most important thing. For a few weeks, the borrowed life felt real, more real than my actual one. The quiet moments with Malene became the structural supports of my week. A shared coffee on a Tuesday morning, a walk through the park on a Saturday afternoon while her daughter, Zoe, chased pigeons. I was learning the rhythms of a life I'd never known, a life where happiness wasn't a quarterly target, but a small, quiet thing that happened in between the grand plans. I had started to feel a dangerous, unfamiliar emotion. Hope. I was in my car, heading to a meeting I was dreading, and I sent her a simple text. Thinking about our conversation yesterday. You were right about that author. It was the kind of message I'd seen other people send, a small thread of connection woven into the fabric of a day. I smiled, waiting for the 3 small dots of her reply to appear. They never did. Hours passed. I sent another message in the late afternoon. Hope you're having a good day. Again, nothing. A cold knot began to tighten in my stomach. It was illogical, I told myself. She was busy. She was a mother with a job. 1,000 perfectly reasonable explanations existed, but none of them quieted the feeling that a foundation had shifted somewhere beneath my feet. I tried calling that evening. It went straight to voicemail, a sterile, computerized voice that felt like a slammed door. The hope I'd been feeling began to curdle into a familiar, metallic taste of dread. Something was wrong. I broke a rule I had made for myself. I went to the library the next day near closing time. Not to see her. I lied to myself, but just to browse. But my feet carried me there with a purpose I couldn't deny. I saw her through the large front window, talking to a coworker. The easy smile she always had was gone. I waited outside, the evening air turning cold. When she finally walked out, pulling on her coat, she saw me standing there, and she froze. The warmth that had always been in her eyes when she looked at me was gone. In its place was something I couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger. It was a kind of quiet, deep disappointment that felt infinitely worse. Malene, I started, walking toward her. Hey, is everything okay? You should go, Grayson, she said, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion. She didn't look at me. What is it? Did I do something? Just talk to me. She finally lifted her head, and her eyes met mine. We had the news on in the break room today. She said, each word precise, clinical. There was a story about wild hotels, about a new acquisition. She paused, letting the silence hang between us. You looked very comfortable in your suit, not like a writer at all. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. All the air left my lungs. Malene, I can explain. Can you? She asked, a flicker of something sharp in her voice. Can you explain why the man I've been spending my time with, the man I told my daughter about, doesn't actually exist? He does exist, I pleaded, my voice sounding weak, desperate. That's the most real version of me you've seen. The rest of it, the name, the company, that's a costume. She gave a short, bitter laugh that didn't reach her eyes. That's a beautiful way to put it, Grayson. But the costume comes with a lie. A very big, very fundamental lie. I shared parts of my life with you. My real life. And you shared a story. She pulled her coat tighter, a physical act of closing herself off from me. I need to go. My daughter is waiting. She started to walk away. I stood there, rooted to the pavement, watching the distance between us grow. Every instinct screamed at me to go after her, to fix it, to deploy the charisma and influence I used to bend the world to my will. But I knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that none of it would work here. My power was useless. My name was a liability. The entire empire I had built couldn't bridge the few feet of sidewalk between us. She didn't look back. I stood there under the dim glow of a streetlight, completely and utterly alone, the silence she left behind filled with a deafening roar of my own deception. The elevator ride up to my penthouse felt like a descent. Each floor it climbed was a step deeper into the cold, silent prison I had built for myself. When the doors opened to my apartment, the familiar view of the city skyline offered no comfort. The glittering lights looked like shards of broken glass. The silence I had once curated as a luxury now felt like an accusation, a heavy blanket smothering me. Maline's words echoed in the vast, empty space. The man I've been spending my time with, he doesn't actually exist. She was right. I had offered her a ghost, a carefully edited version of a man, and I had been surprised when she'd recoiled from the lie. I walked through the rooms, each object a monument to my success and my failure. The minimalist Italian sofa that cost more than a car. The abstract painting on the wall I'd bought at an auction. There were things I owned, but they weren't alive. They were props on a stage, and the play was a tragedy I had written myself. My entire life had been a series of strategic moves, of calculated risks and acquisitions. I had acquired companies, properties, art. I had tried to acquire a relationship under false pretenses, and I had lost. This was not a business deal gone wrong. This was a moral bankruptcy. The phone rang, piercing the silence. It was Owen. I stared at it, then answered, my voice hoarse. I heard, he said, his usual cheer gone, replaced by a quiet concern. Maline called me. She told me to cancel her number in your phone. Are you okay? No, I said. It was the truest word I'd spoken in months. There was a long pause on his end. What were you thinking, Gray? I sank down onto the sofa, the expensive leather cool against my skin. I wasn't thinking. I admitted, the confession a painful weight lifting off my chest. When she asked what I did, I panicked. For the first time, someone was looking at me, and not at my name. And I was a coward. I wanted to keep that feeling. I wanted to protect it. By lying to her, I told myself it was to protect us. I said, the self-deception tasting like ash in my mouth, that if she knew who I was, everything would change. She would change. But I never gave her the chance. I made the decision for her. I treated her like she was just like all the others, and in doing so, I guaranteed I would lose her. The words came out in a raw, ragged stream. All the excuses, all the justifications, they all collapsed under the simple weight of the truth. I had been so afraid of being betrayed again that I had become the betrayer. The armor I had welded around my heart after my engagement ended hadn't just protected me. It had isolated me. It had starved me of the very thing I claimed to want. We talked for a little while longer, but my mind was elsewhere. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for hours, the city lights dimming as the night wore on. I finally understood. The lie wasn't just about my job. It was about my fear. Fear of being seen. Fear of not being enough without the name and the money. Fear of trusting someone with the entire, complicated truth of my life. Maline had offered me a chance at a real connection, and I had met her trust with a fiction because I no longer trusted in anything real myself. A quiet resolve began to form in the ruins of my regret. This couldn't be fixed with a grand gesture. Flowers, gifts, apologies, they were all just noise. They were the tools of the man I had been, the CEO who solved problems with money and influence. That man had failed. True courage wasn't facing down a hostile board or closing a multi-billion-dollar deal. I saw that now. True courage was showing up without armor and facing the consequences of your own actions. It was about making an honest amends, not to win her back, but simply because it was the right thing to do. I didn't know if she would ever speak to me again, but I knew I had to give her the truth, with no expectation of forgiveness. It was the only thing I had left to offer. I waited a week. It was the longest week of my life. The old me would have acted immediately, would have tried to solve the problem with the brute force of my resources. I would have sent flowers, a car, a letter, all grand gestures designed to overwhelm and impress. But the man who had stood alone on that sidewalk understood that those gestures were just another form of noise. What Maline deserved was silence, space, the respect of my absence. During that week, I went through the motions of my life. I attended meetings, I took calls, I managed the empire. But I was doing it as an observer, seeing with a terrifying clarity how much of my identity was tied up in the performance of being Grayson Wilde. The real work was happening in the quiet moments in between, the long, solitary hours of dismantling the armor I had worn for years. It was a painful, necessary process. On the 8th day, I knew what I had to do. There was a book on my nightstand, the one she had recommended, its cover slightly dog-eared. I had finished it the night before. My reason for seeing her couldn't be about me or what I wanted. It had to be about closing a loop, an honest transaction to replace a dishonest one I had started. I drove myself to the library in the late afternoon. I didn't wear a suit. I wore the same simple sweater I'd worn the first time I came here under false pretenses. This time, I had nothing to hide. Walking through the glass doors, my heart hammered against my ribs. The library was just as I remembered it, an oasis of calm. And she was there, standing behind the main circulation desk, helping a young child find their library card. I didn't approach. I didn't try to catch her eye. I simply went to the return slot and waited, my hand feeling slick with sweat. When she finished with the child, her eyes scanned the room and landed on me. There was no surprise, no anger, just a quiet, unreadable stillness. She gave me a small, professional nod. When it was my turn, I walked to the desk and placed the book on the counter between us. Her gaze flickered down to the cover, then back up to me. "I came to return this," I said, my voice steady, though it took all my effort to keep it that way. She took the book, her movements efficient, and turned to her computer to scan it. "Okay," she said, her tone polite, distant. The sound of the scanner beeping felt unnervously loud in the quiet room. This was it, the moment I had rehearsed in my head 1,000 times, and now the carefully planned words felt hollow. So I just spoke the truth. "Malene," I said, keeping my voice low, "I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm not here to try and fix what I broke. I needed to apologize to you for what I did." I took a breath, meeting her guarded gaze. "There is no excuse. I was a coward. I lied to you because I was afraid. And in doing so, I disrespected you and I broke your trust. You are a person who deserved nothing but honesty from the very beginning. And I failed. For that, I am truly, deeply sorry." I had said what I came to say. I expected nothing in return, a curt nod, a cold dismissal. I was prepared for her to simply finish checking in the book and look past me to the next person in line. She was silent for a long time, her eyes searching mine, looking for something. The artifice, maybe, the angle. She found none. Finally, she pushed the book onto a cart behind her and leaned forward slightly. "Thank you for saying that," she said, her voice softer than before. A small crack in the ice. "It's the least I could do," I replied. I started to turn away, to leave as promised, but her voice stopped me. "That man," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "The one who liked old books and talked about the quiet places in the world. I liked him." My heart seized. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an invitation. It was just an acknowledgement that something real had existed within the lie. It was more than I deserved. I turned back to her and gave her a small, genuine smile, the first one that had reached my eyes in over a week. "Me too," I said, and then I left. I walked out of the library and into the late afternoon sun. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I would ever have a real conversation with her again. But as I walked down the street, the city no longer felt like a cage. It just felt like a place where people lived. The future was an unwritten page, a story I had not yet earned the right to read. But for the first time, I felt ready to build something on a true foundation, even if it was just myself. And for the first time, that felt like enough.